So on standard 9, if you're given a problem that looks like this, it says write a cosine function given the following properties. Okay? So I'm giving you the properties of this cosine graph, and you have to write the function. You have to write the equation for it. Okay? There's a couple that are pretty easy. The amplitude and the vertical shift should make pretty good sense. Okay? You know, if you think about our standard form that we've discussed, a times the cosine of bx plus c plus d. If you think about that, okay, if my amplitude is 6, then I'm going to put a 6 where? Right in front of cosine, right? Because that's where my amplitude is impacted. That's what affects the height of the wave. So I'll have 6 cosine bx plus c. And then the other easy one is our vertical shift. A vertical shift of -5 just means it's going to move down 5 units. So at the very back end, I'm going to put -5. Okay? So those are typically pretty simple to do. It's finding the correct B and C values so that they have the correct period and the correct phase shift is where typically we run into some problems. Okay? Well, here's kind of what I would tell you. When you are given an equation and you are asked to find the new period, so if I give you an equation and say, hey, what's the period of this function? What do you do? What math do you do to find the new period? You do 2 pi divided by the b value, right? Okay, so if the b value was 10, you take 2 pi divided by 10, and that would be the new period. Okay, well, so we're just working backwards. If typically, to find the period, you take 2 pi divided by b, if that's typically what you do, well then just work backwards from that. If we know the period has to be 3 pi, then actually plug 3 pi in for the period, and then solve that equation for b. Because we know that 2 pi divided by b has to equal 3 pi, right? So if 2 pi divided by b has to equal 3 pi, I'd multiply both sides by b, so that would give me this. B times 3 pi equals 2 pi. Divide both sides by 3 pi, and you get b equals 2/3. Yes, no? Okay, so now I know that my b value is 2/3. You with me? Check your answer if you want. If you want to take 2 pi divided by 2/3, 2 pi divided by 2/3 will give you 3 pi. So you're working backwards to check your work. Right? Okay? Alright, then the tricky part, the plus c. Okay? We need our phase shift to be a -pi/4. Well, to figure that out, I again would ask you, if I just gave you a generic equation and said, hey, find the phase shift, what math would you do to find your phase shift? You set the parentheses equal to 0, and then you'd solve, right? You'd set the parentheses equal to 0, and then you would solve for x. That's how you would find your phase shift. Okay? So, what I'm going to do then, is I'm going to set my parentheses equal to 0. But instead of solving for x, didn't they give me what the phase shift is? They told me the phase shift has to be -pi/4. So I can substitute -pi/4 in for x and solve for c. Okay, because they told me what the phase shift was. Alright? So 2/3 times -pi/4 plus c equals 0. Yes, no, questions? So now we solve. This would be a -2 pi over 12, better known as -pi over 6. Add pi over 6 to both sides, and you'd get c equals pi over 6. So then c is simply pi over 6. So this would be your answer. You could make it a positive 6, you could make it a negative 6, it really doesn't matter, right? The amplitude will still be 6 in front there, okay? But this is how I would find the correct function that has the given property. Are there any questions that you have?
Why do you put the plus or minus before the 6?
Okay, I mean, let's say I just for fun wrote y equals negative cosine, 6 cosine. What's the amplitude? No. What is the amplitude?
6.
Because amplitude represents what, Maddie? Height, right? So we'll never say it has a negative height. Does that make sense? Okay, so do you guys understand that's why it's okay if you want to put a negative there or put a plus minus, because it doesn't really matter. Either way, the amplitude will still be 6. Okay? Keep that in mind too on a test. You know, if I give you an equation and ask you for the amplitude, never give me a negative number as the amplitude. Because an amplitude, like you said, is the height of the wave, and you won't have negative heights. That make sense? Good question. Glad we brought that up. Any other questions?